It's time to get sexy, so watch Secular Sexuality Live Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTSS and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callsex.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of The Nonprofits, the show where we discuss news and topics of the day from a skeptical, humanist perspective. My name is Richard Gilliver, and today I am joined by my very, very good friend, Kelley Laughlin. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to hear I'm your very great friend. That's awesome.
Yeah, I've got quite a few of them, including another one, Student Dr. Ben. How are you doing?
Oh, whoa, I teleported from Talk Heathen and ended up here. I don't know how that happened, but here we go.
I'm sorry.
Let's talk about some stuff today. I'm ready.
Things like that do
Is that
tend
a
to
fancy
happen
teleportation chair?
I'm
sorry,
sure.
Derailing me already, and we've not even started yet. This professional voice. This show is a product of the atheist community of Austin, a 50c3 non-profit organization dedicated to promoting atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. Today, we're going to be talking about, will nuns bust world population growth? LDS Church backs same-sex marriage law? Catholic bishops worry about abortion views in Pews? And looking back, number 3, refuse to acknowledge Thanksgiving. We'll get all those will become much clearer as the show goes on. As with all of our shows, links to today's topics and the news we discuss are available in the description below. And a reminder that if you want to come into the show prepared, you can check out the Nonprofits Facebook fan page every Friday night for a list of the articles ahead of time. This is going to be a good show, as I said in the introduction. Very good friends of mine here, so we've had a laugh already in the green room, so that's going to continue, I'm sure, throughout the show. We're going to go into our first article, which Kelley will take us into.
All right. This is really interesting to me. It was published in Only Sky Media, written by Andrew Fiala. And it's called "Could the Rise of the Non-Religious Defuse the Population Bomb?" And it's a pretty good article. It's got some really good statistics in it, and I always love that kind of thing. But it posits the idea that because secular people are having less children, we may actually be helping save the earth in that respect. So I think it's a pretty good concept, something we should really talk about, especially with people on the other side of the aisle maybe wanting to have more and more children than they probably should. But let's open it up to chat. What do you think, Ben? What are your ideas on it?
Yeah, so this is an interesting and kind of nuanced discussion to have because, of course, we talk about population growth, and you hear this argument, and I've heard this specifically, especially with regard to gay and trans communities with, well, you people can't reproduce, which we know is not true because we do know that we see gay and trans people in relationships where they can reproduce. So that's not even a valid argument. But apart from that, even if you took secular communities versus non-secular communities, I do agree that religious people tend to have more children. And I think a lot of this has to do with traditional gender roles. In fact, you see within these religious communities, primarily people who have a uterus and are capable of bearing a child through pregnancy. Um, with a lot of them understanding that their worth is no longer based on their ability to bear children, and that starting a family isn't the number one priority for their life. I think that, I mean, this is freeing for me as somebody who is part of that population. But if you take this population who have that ability and say, this is what determines your worth in society. And that's the only message they hear. Of course, they're more likely to listen and they're more likely to value that as a priority. But once you say, hey, this is an option, but not a mandate, not a priority necessarily, of course, some of them are going to say, that is for me and I want this. And then some are going to say, you know what? No, I'd be happier without having children. And I think once we've opened up these options, I think it's better for us as a society. It's better for people who have a uterus, but it's also better for the population, just in that we're reaching a carrying capacity. And I'm sure Richard and Kelley are going to get into this as well, but we have a limited amount of resources that we are already terrible at distributing throughout the population. And there are some ways that population reduction can be a good thing. And I don't know, I have a whole other kind of different rant about this, but I kind of want to hear both of your thoughts first before I get into that specific point.
Kelley.
Oh, you want me to go next? Darn.
Yeah,
I was
go on.
hoping you would, but no, I have no problem. I'm just messing around. Both my kids are atheists. I didn't raise them to be atheists. They became atheists on their own, which just really made me proud. But neither of my kids, they're 26 and 23. They have no plans on having children themselves. My son is a strict antinatalist. My daughter says she's not against childbirth, but if her and her partner have children, it's either going to be because they adopted them or fostered them. And I think that's noble. I don't have a problem with that. So I can at least say from my personal experience, this idea that secular people are not having children seems to be true, at least in my family. And so you got to wonder, what is it that's causing that? Is it just logical thinking? Because that's what it seems to be, at least in my logic, right? And it seems to be the main driving force. And I don't know how sitting down and looking at something and doing some critical thinking about it can be a bad idea. So I'm pretty happy to see this, right? Richard, go ahead. I'm going to hand it off to you. I've got a few other things, but what do you think?
I think you've both made some good points, but I think I had a problem with this. I think I'm sure they only have me on here to like cause dissension because I always disagree with everyone. I think Ben made some very good points and took the conversation where it needs to go with the kind of the subtleties, and that's what I think this article was missing. I think it's as an article in itself, it's too broad, and it. I don't think it touches, and touching on your point, Kelley, in your experience, I think that's fine, but I think it's also it's not representative of that kind of the evidence I found when looking at this article was that. So I did some digging, I did some research on this. I used information from 2020. And I started out looking at the countries that were very, very secular. So we're talking about the Scandinavian ones, which are known as being very secular countries. And on average, per woman, Denmark had an average of 1.7 babies per woman, or people with uterus. But I'm sure that that's what they meant when they said women in this research. And Norway had 1.5 and Sweden 1.7. So I then looked at 3 European countries, which are kind of in the same region geographically as the Scandinavian ones, which I knew to be very religious. And they had Spain 1.2 babies per person with uterus, Poland 1.4, and Italy 1.2. So automatically there seems to be a bit of a discrepancy there between that and the article. So I thought I got into a bit of a train on this, and I thought, right, I'm going to have a look a little bit further. I found a really good site with all the extra data in, and we'll put that in the description below so you can all have a look at that too. So I had a look at other examples. So I looked at a different region altogether. So I looked at the Far East with China, 1.7 children, Japan, 1.3, and Singapore, 1.1. The Middle East, which is very religious, Saudi Arabia 2.2, Iran 2.1, and the United Arab Emirates 1.4. And some of them, the United Arab Emirates there, is still lower than the Scandinavian countries, even though it's got a state religion in Islam. Africa was even higher. Rwanda 3.9, Kenya 3.4, and Nigeria 5.2. And that source seems to have a much more interesting link to what influences birth rates than whether you're religious or secular. And it tells us that high-income countries have 1.5 children per woman, middle income 2.3, and low income 4.5. So it seems to me when we look at a wider range of data that what we're getting is a wider picture than just secular versus religious. And I think that's a conversation that needs to be had. I think it's a legitimate conversation. But I think when we look at a wider picture, we see a different set of influences as to why people are having children. And it seems to be kind of wealth and poverty related. So I disagreed more, I think, with you, Kelley. So I'll pass it over to you to get your opinion on those figures.
You know what, when you started pointing out the figures from the different countries, the first thing went in my head, I was like, yeah, but couldn't you attribute that to economic reasons? Right.
Yeah.
So I definitely think you're onto something there. And one of the things I think, and I don't have because I didn't prepare for this, but I think I have read in the past that secular countries tend to fare better economically. So maybe there's a connection there too, right? That the economic connection is also because of the secularity. I don't know though. I really don't. I don't have the data to do that, but it's something I want to go check out after the show's over. So Ben, you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely love to see more numbers, and especially since we're seeing confounding variables. We had one variable that is claimed to be an association. We don't really have the numbers showing causality at this point, but as Richard is pointing out, we have multiple variables that play into this. We have socioeconomic status, we have location, we have culture, we have the religious influence as well. So I'd be interested to see more numbers kind of narrowing down. Like if you could control for these other variables, would you still see a similar trend? And I think that's where we would need to go. And something else, like I did want to mention, just with the fact that we tend to see this simple equation of population increasing, resources decreasing as like, yes, I acknowledge that this is a problem. But I do want to address the issues of increasing population with regard to age stratification. And if you have these societies that you have this middle population of people between ages of like 18 and 65, so your primary workforce that are going to be providing for the younger people and also providing for the older people in society, and there becomes a huge issue beyond just redistribution of resources and food and all that. But if you have this part of society caring for these extremes in age ranges, and if you drastically decrease the amount of babies that are being born into this newer generation, then you have this higher amount of people of the older age ranges that younger group is going to have to try to support. And even beyond that, as we develop more medical science, you have more elderly people that are staying alive longer with more chronic diseases, just because they're not dying as quickly, which is great. I love that we're able to keep people alive, but that's an extra amount of population that needs to be cared for by this middle population of ages. And I just don't know if that's sustainable either. And so we can say that this is a positive thing hypothetically, but without looking into the details of what are really the implications of population change, it's much more nebulous and difficult to predict.
Yeah, Kelley.
I just want to point out that that they did go through some figures, like I think Muslims on the average had 2.6 children per woman. Christians were a little bit below that, 2.2, I think. I can't remember right off the bat. But they were saying that because the secular, there's a rise in people who are secular. It's balancing the fact that the theists are having more children. And I hope that that's true, if this is all the factor that's driving this and not something economic, right? So I just did want to mention that there is that quiverful movement. It's really popular in the US, at least. If you don't know what it is, it's a Christian theological position that large families are a gift from God, and having more and more children is encouraged. There's a reality show with the Duggars, and they're a quiverful family. Some people claim this is a better way to control society by making more Christians, right? So that they can control the government. The idea goes back centuries back to the rise of the Calvinists and the Anabaptists. But it has become increasingly popular today. And I believe that's because of this existential threat that many Christians have, that they're being relegated to the trash heap of history by a society that's becoming progressively more secular, right? But hopefully, like I say, the good news seems to be that this isn't working, because enough people are giving up their religion to balance it out. So I think that's a hopeful thing for the future. Richard?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think I want to touch on something you said there when you're talking about particular demographic groups and the amount of children they have, because in the data I was looking at, I found that if we're taking on a global scale, if we have a look at, I took two of the countries out of there, both which are Islamic, one which is officially Islamic, and one which just has a majority Muslim countries, and that's United Arab Emirates, which is going back to the kind of financial looking reasoning. That's significantly more well off than Kenya. Both are Muslim majority countries, but Kenya's officially secular. But that Kenya has a birth rate which is more than half of that of the UAE. So it seems again that if we're having a look at kind of on a global scale, it's more a thing of poverty that we're looking at here, rather than whether someone's religious. If you take two religious countries of the same religion, there's a massive disparity, and the overall overriding thing seems to be how rich a country is, and the poverty levels in that country, rather than it being religious. So this is my thing with this article. I have no problem with this article, despite complaining about it incessantly from the beginning. I think as an article in itself, as a broad article for the country it was produced in, I think it's and this touches on your points, Kelley, and this is why I don't necessarily disagree with you on this. I think it works from that point of view. I think if you're taking the USA and having a look at the USA, I think it makes some very good and some very valid points. But I think if you look at the data globally, it doesn't seem to match what the article's saying. And I think that's where what Ben's saying comes into play, which is a more nuanced argument, which is I'm playing politician here, aren't I? I just realized. But no, I genuinely do think it's if you have a look at the kind of the more nuanced arguments, that's where this article needs to lead, and where it doesn't necessarily lead. And I think that for me was the difficulty I had with it. It wasn't that it was wrong. It was that it was painting with a very, very broad brush, where it needed to be much more nuanced. So let's go for some final thoughts on this one. We'll start with Ben.
I don't know. I've said all my thoughts, and I agree with Richard in that this needs to be a more nuanced conversation. And in fact, if we're going to have conversations about this broad of an issue, we do need to acknowledge that, hey, this is one variable. We have not evaluated for other variables necessarily, and we need more data. I think that's the most honest position that this probably could have taken. but it's also a lot to ask of a media outlet to say something like, we don't actually know. But I do agree that if I were writing this article, I would dial back and leave this more open to nuance.
Kelley.
I just want to say that by helping society as a whole become more secular, we create more scientists, right? Because it lets kids be more open to science. And those new scientists will be working on ways to help stop and maybe hopefully start reversing some of the damage that we've already done to the earth. So it seems to me that having a more secular, critical, logical thinking is a pathway to a better future. And this article kind of just drives that home in my mind. So hopefully that we can kind of take a path like that.
Lovely. Thank you very much, guys. I knew this was going to be a good episode as soon as I saw I was on with. Right. Thank you to our veteran and our new viewers for getting us over the 11,000 people. Just sit back and think about that. 11,000 subscribers. That's all because of you. Thank you. So if you are watching us now and you haven't subscribed yet, so you're not one of those 11,000, get on that. Please get on it. Once you've subscribed, like and ring the bell so you always know when a new Non-Profits episode premieres. And I'll tell you now, not only is it every Sunday at 3 p.m. Central Time, but it is the only show that it is on a Sunday at 3 p.m. Central Time that is worth watching. And I will never get bored of saying that. That's almost like I'm challenging other shows out there, isn't it? I don't know why I would do that. Anyway, once you've done that, share the link to our channel with your friends, family members, co-workers, everybody, your pet dogs, if you visit a zoo, the zoo animals, bits of paper in the street, trees outside, trees like the non-profits do. Go and just share it with everybody. Get everybody watching the non-profits, whether they're animate or inanimate. Let's just get the word out there. That will help us amazingly with our fundraisers, which will help us get more people watching, which means that more and more people will have to listen to me. No, that's not very good advertisement, is it? Scratch that bit. Anyway, are you aware that the atheist community of Austin has another YouTube channel? It should be. Check out the Atheist Experience Network, a channel where you can find all the ACA show in podcast form. Subscribe at tiny.cc/AEN podcast to listen to episodes of the Non-Profits, the Atheist Experience, Secular Sexuality. I've got to mention Talk Heathen, haven't I, seen as Ben's on, and all of our other ACA shows so you don't miss a single episode. So, our next segment, let's talk about that. The good old Mormon church, wanting its cake and eating it. This is the thing when you have a religion that claims to have a direct line to God. You can just make shit up as you go along and say whatever suits you. This article comes from the Associated Press from November the 6th and is by Sam Metz. It doesn't look at all, anything at all, like a political move to gain more members. That, for you that may not be aware, is sarcasm. We are told that the Mormon church is happy, very happy, incredibly happy to support same-sex marriage. But same-sex relationships, you know, those touchy-feely, icky things, that's still a sin. So the Mormon church giving out mixed messages in this one. I'm going to jump straight in with Ben and ask for your opinion on this.
All right, yeah. So I might have a hot take here, but I'm not opposed to this perspective from the Mormon church. And I'm not Mormon. I do not agree with their ideology here, but the fact is, like, they can have whatever rules they want in the Mormon church. If they want to say this is how you become a Mormon and this is how you stay in our church, fine. My problem is when those Mormons say you in the secular community or whatever other community you're part of have to partake in our rules as well. And so the fact that if they've come out and said that you can have a legally binding marriage, that's fine, but it's a sin in my religion. I honestly don't have a problem with that because at least they're giving us the leeway to have identical legal benefits, assuming that that's what they're agreeing to here. But But as a bisexual trans man who is engaging in a lot of sinful activity according to the Mormon Church, just as I would not support a religious group interfering with a secular identity, I'm fine with the Mormon Church letting us have at least a way to bypass their religious mandates. So even if I would not be accepted in my marriage with the Mormon Church, fine. And that might offend some people who are Mormon and identify with the LGBTQ community. And that's a whole separate discussion because I don't represent them. But like, as long as I have a way to bypass that problem and to still have identical benefits, I really don't have an issue with this.
Kelley.
Yeah, I on the one hand, this bill seems like a good thing, right? And then you explore the subject a little deeper and you begin to realize why the Church of Latter-day Saints is for this bill. It lets them opt out of it. That's plain and simple. If this bill gets passed, they don't have to conform to it. And if that's the case, and any religious person or organization can opt out, well, what's the purpose of the bill, right? It isn't the non-religious that are attacking same-sex marriage. It's only the religious. And if this bill is allowing those people to still be a threat to non-traditional marriage, it's not helping anything, right? As Richard said, the good old Mormon Church seems to want to have its cake and eat it too. But in the process, they're tossing out a whole section of people in our society that they feel should be discriminated against. And are you really having your cake and eating it too when you're throwing part of it away? I don't think so, right? I agree with the basic idea behind the bill, but I don't know that it's really doing anything, right? Richard, what do you think?
I think it's a step in the right direction. I don't think this is a problem so much with the bill in itself. I think, and let's remember we're discussing here the article itself, which is talking about the Mormon perspective on it, rather than the bill itself. But I think, from my perspective, I've had dealings with the Mormon Church, and I think for me, it's blatantly obvious that there's only one reason that they're changing the stance on kind of gay marriage with this, and that's the same reason that they change the stance on anything. Then that is because they're trying to get members. They're trying to rebrand as mainstream Christians, downplaying all the crazy shit that they've got. And, there's a lot of it. We touched on it a couple of weeks ago, the last time we were on together, Kelley, when we were talking about Cain being Bigfoot in some areas of the Mormon tradition. And they want to downplay all that crazy stuff, and that people live on the moon and things like that, which are all parts of Mormon teachings. And they want to emphasize Jesus, and they want to become kind of more. They want to rebrand as more mainstream Christianity, and that's just simply because they're hemorrhaging members. And I think that's an important point itself, which relates to this. Official Mormon figures tell a very different story. And that in itself is interesting. But when we look at the official Mormon figures, Mormons count anybody who has ever been baptized, whereas non-church and secular polls count self-identifying Mormons. And the church knows this full well. And the church makes it increasingly difficult for members to leave. You've got to literally take the Church of the Latter-day Saints to court, which is an intimidating and expensive measure for them to officially remove you from their records. So, they are quite really skewing the numbers. And that's a very important factor into why they're rebranding. And that is exactly why they're trying to change the public perception of them. And I think that is the reason why this bill, why they're not publicly so opposed to this bill, is because it's all part of that huge rebranding that they're having at the minute. So, it's a difficult one. Anytime a religious organization kind of supports something like this, I think it's a good thing. I genuinely think it's a good thing. I think if we're looking more into it, I think the reasoning behind it is somewhat nefarious. But it depends on I think for a gay person in the Mormon community, it is very difficult for gay people in the Mormon community. I think this will be a huge kind of breath of fresh air for them. It's almost like the church is kind of vindicating them and saying, we do accept that you are legitimate in some way, even if the church's reasons for doing so probably aren't the best. But I'm going to pass on over to Ben because I've been talking for a while now.
Yeah,
Let
no,
someone else have a say.
I do want to mention, like, this is a battle that we've been fighting within the LGBTQ community for a long time with a lot of religious organizations. And yes, like, part of me does care about their intentions, but more so, I don't. More so, I care about the actions that are happening. And if somebody wants to hate me for being gay or hate me for being trans, but they at least take efforts to say, hey, I'm at least going to support you in what your rights are as a person and what you want to do with your life. Sure, I can wish as much as I want that this person would change their intentions, but this is a fantastic first step. They don't necessarily need to change their full intentions in order to benefit the group that is targeted by this bill. So while it's not the end result that I would desire in the future, this definitely is improvement, and hopefully their intentions will change. But in the meantime, I'm willing to accept poor intentions for good action as opposed to good intentions with poor action.
Yeah, I love this. I do love this conversation, and not just from the Mormon perspective, from the wider religious perspective, because I think it is. We see this not just in Mormonism, and we talked about it a few weeks ago on the non-profits when I think we're talking about Catholicism at the time, and kind of getting that weighing balance of, is it better to have religious people who are true to the faith and all the bullshit and horrors that brings, or is it better to have religious people who remain religious and accept more liberal ideas and move in the right direction? And it's a difficult conversation to have because there are so many factors to it. I fully appreciate what you're saying, Ben. I accept that it's a step in the right direction. I don't know if I'm biased with this because I do personally know someone who is gay and sought advice from her bishop in the Mormon church, and she was sent to a Mormon counselor. So let's be blunt, but I mean she was given conversion therapy, and she's now married to a man and still an active member of the church. So I do have a bias on this. I know people who've been personally affected by the Mormon church. And for me, it screams. It's not just a little like whimper. This is screaming Mormons changing their mind for the wrong reasons. And I'm torn on it. I've got to admit I'm really torn on it. Kelley, what do you think?
Well, I will agree with you that the Mormon Church took a really big hit on the whole Prop 8 debacle in California. So, I mean, maybe this is a way to appeal to the younger crowd after they really messed up then. I do agree with the basic idea behind this bill. Don't get me wrong by what I said before, because I really do. I just see it as just a tiny bone being tossed to the forward-thinking people to shut us up, in my eyes, it really doesn't do its intended purpose. However, as we said, baby steps. It's at least a step in the right direction. And me being older, I remember when that horrible idea of don't ask, don't tell was accepted by the U.S. military in the 90s. And at that time, it was lauded as a huge step forward, even if 15 years later, it was seen as the farce that it really was, right? So, its passage did, however, get people talking about it, and it led to more openness, more open dialogue, and it ended up with members of the military being able to be legally, openly gay about their sexuality in the military. So I'm hoping that this bill does the same thing, that it creates that more open dialogue, and it moves our society a little farther down the road to true acceptance.
Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree that there are some nefarious intentions here. And again, I hope that it heads in a better direction, and I hope that they don't take further actions to inhibit progress. But like as this has been such a struggle for so long, I'm willing to give them a little bit for this little bit of progress that they've granted us. And yeah, and I don't think at all that it's ethical for the church to be treating the community like they have been, and that should absolutely end. But I think queer people should not be involved in any of these organizations at all. But it's, again, like we were talking about with the previous article, there's some nuance to this conversation that it's difficult to look at this and say this is blanketly what should be the correct answer, because there's a lot here that we could probably take hours to uncover with the exact nuance. But I do think there's been a lot of good points here today.
Yeah,
I think
go on, Kelley.
I was going to say, unfortunately, we can't solve the problem in only 20 minutes. I wish we could, but unfortunately.
No. I think the Mormon Church, of course, has been here before, or somewhere like this before, when they allowed eventually, and again under the same kind of circumstances, that it was becoming more acceptable socially, when they allowed black people the priesthood in 1978. And it's, this is not a new thing for the Mormon Church, changing their stance on something when social issues in the wider community are moving in that direction. And it is a step in the right direction, and nobody can, I don't think, argue against that. It's not their stance on this bill particularly which is the problem for me. It's the motivation behind it. And I think while ever you've got a whether it's a religious or secular organization, anybody who is kind of saying one thing in the public domain and doing another behind closed doors, it's going to be problematic. I'd like to see the Mormon Church not just pay lip service to this bill, but to actually allow gay people in their own community the right to have those relationships themselves. When the Mormon Church starts allowing same-sex marriages within that community, then I'll be much, much more impressed with the Mormon Church than kind of agreeing to a bill that it doesn't affect their own members. And like, it's a nuanced conversation. It's a very interesting conversation for both Mormonism and in the wider community. Is it a step in the right direction? Yeah, probably. Yeah, I think it probably is a step in the right direction, but I'd say it's a baby step in the right direction. So let's go for some final thoughts on this. Kelley, we'll go with you first on this one.
I have to agree. It is a step in the right direction. I just wish that step hadn't been just a baby step, that we had taken a much longer gait at this point, because it's about time. I think it's time for us to realize that we are just not up to date with the legality of our society, right? We just need to get more in step with with the way that people really feel, like the majority of people feel. So that's it.
Ben?
Yeah, I mean, same kind of thoughts. It would be very nice if the Mormon Church would catch up with society and not just, throw around their like communication with God to correct themselves and not face any consequences for the previous decision they made. So of course, like a bunch of their congregation decides, yeah, I don't like this church anymore because they oppose gay rights. And now they're like, hold on, but we don't actually oppose gay rights because God says it's a sin, but you can still do it legally in the court system. So it's fine. It's like they love to backpedal, and it's very disingenuous. And so I agree with your points on that. But it'd be nice if eventually they stop deciding to just like appease everybody in their audience while also trying to manipulate them, and just, either said everything outright and committed to it, or actually tried to do things for the right reasons. But
yeah, steps in the right direction. That's we have a whole segment dedicated to it. It's let's hope that in the future they take a few more steps in that direction. Okay, so let's take a break from our conversation. If you didn't tune into the other ACA shows last week, here is what you missed.
And just go ahead and encourage everybody, gay or straight, short or tall, fat or small, to go ahead and give themselves a big old orgasm. Or,
yes.
Better yet, give somebody else one.
There are some Christians that would say that my Christianity isn't valid because if I truly had the Holy Spirit in me, then I wouldn't have left.
You wouldn't have, yeah. So you weren't actually saved in the first. My Christianity could totally beat up your Christianity. It's like so much more Christian than yours.
Can they get the First Amendment out of their mouths if they're not going to read the whole thing? Because it also says Congress may not establish a national religion, but you guys are trying your damnedest to do that. So read the whole damn thing, would ya?
If you don't understand the basic principles of how the science work, how can you possibly critique it? How can you possibly sit here and call up this show and talk to a biologist and say everything in your field of science is absolutely wrong when you can't even give us a single sentence summary of what you're talking about?
If I tell my wife, if you don't love me, I'm going to set you on fire, am I a loving, good husband?
If you set her on fire, then you never loved her to begin with.
And if God sends us to hell, he never loved us to begin with.
Wrong.
Okay.
Hello, welcome back. If you can arrange to be in the Austin area between December 15th and 18th, consider joining us in the studio audience at the ACA Free Thought Library for live broadcasts of secular sexuality, Truth Wanted, Talk Heathen, and the Atheist Experience. Doors open at 6 p.m. on Thursday and Friday and noon on Sunday. Parking is where you can find a legal spot after the lot is full. If you can't make it there this month, we will continue to broadcast live from the library the last week of every month. So keep watching this show and our website, atheist-community.org, for news and information as to we expand our in-studio offerings in the near future. I would love to be able to travel the 5,000 miles or so to Austin, Texas. That's not an exact distance, by the way. That's just me talking off the top of my head.
Can I chime in really quickly on this? But
you can. I'm
only saying this because I'm going to be there for that Sunday, so everybody should come say hi because I'll be there.
Everyone go and say Ben to me and watch him rub it in the fact that I can't actually be there.
I'll tell you what, Richard, if you make it to Michigan, I'll drive you the rest of the way.
If I can make it to Michigan, I think I've done the hard part already. Right, let's go into segment 3, and Ben's going to take us into this one.
All right, so this is kind of along similar lines to the last one, but we have U.S. Catholic bishops worry about abortion views in the pews. And this is an article by AP News by Peter Smith on November 17th, 2022. And this was an interesting one. So sounds like they had a bunch of Catholic bishops meeting up to talk about what do we support in Catholicism. And one of their biggest points of concern was the abortion issue, because as we know, with the massive controversy with Roe v. Wade across the country, a lot of the younger generation has said, no, we actually like bodily autonomy. And I I have to say, I love Gen Z, and I love the people that have finally said we're done with the Catholic Church and their bullshit. Like, for granted, like a lot of them are still religious and wanting to partake in these church activities, but this is helping us out in ways that people are now questioning authority and demanding explanations for these policies. Like, there were times when the Catholic Church was able to just say, yeah, this is what God says, so do it. And if you don't do it my way, you're going to hell. And now people are saying, hold on a sec. What if that's not true? And I really like seeing the Catholic Church having to backpedal now and finally be forced to explore the reasons why their manipulative tactics are failing.
Yeah, Kelley.
Yeah, what I see here is the last gasps of a dying animal. There's really quite a bit to unpack in this article. There's a lot of information. To start with, was it just me, or did anyone think it was weird that the only black bishop in the room is like right in the centerpiece of the accompanying photo? I mean, I looked around the rest of that room and he seemed like to be the only one there. It was sort of like they were trying to prove that they had one black friend, you know? It kind of really bothered me seeing that photo. And maybe it's just me. But one of the things that really bothers me about this is the idea that the church is like infallible, unless of course it's about social issues that if I'm a conservative bishop, I don't personally like the idea of, then the church isn't infallible anymore, right? There's been a movement by conservative bishops in the United States farther and farther to the right for quite some time now. A lot of it is not quite in line with our more liberal Pope now, and some American bishops have even have spoken outright against him. They even elected a conservative culture warrior to head to become the president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. I'm sorry, I got a little tongue-tied there. His name was Timothy Broglio, and he's from the Archdiocese of the Military Services, because there's nothing better than a warrior for Jesus to lead us, right? Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. So that was the first thing that bothered me. There's a lot more in the article to unpack, but Richard, I don't want to go too far before I let you have a voice. So
You know what? You just made me laugh, because as soon as you said that, I thought back to those advertisements that pop up on social media every so often of the Jesus T-shirts with the kind of the Holy Knight and with the sword held aloft and warrior for Jesus written down the T-shirt in big like horrible font, and imagining that people actually do buy these things. And I think that's great. I think look, this article, I think it's a funny article in a way, because it's got the line running through of the conference, but it touches on lots of different little kind of parts of Catholicism, which I'm sure we'll get to in due course, but it's not just one stance on one thing. But I think the main thing that stood out when I first started reading this article for me was that it's a contrast to the last article. Whereas Mormonism was bending over backwards to try and improve its public image, the Catholic Church seems to always be going in the other direction. And it seems to be trying as hard as it can to put as many people off joining as possible. And this article is a good example of that, because it's telling us, you know, the Catholic Church are telling us themselves that their followers don't agree with their stance on this. And I think that is amazing. The fact that in the light of that, they're still sticking with it. And they're saying that, you know, we don't care what you in the pews think. We're not bothered about what your opinion is. This is what we're saying is the truth. And it's kind of the exact opposite of what we were talking about before, when religions kind of take a step in the right direction. You know, and the Catholic Church on this have even gone so far, as to deny communion to the Catholic House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi. And the reason they've denied communion to her was that she supports abortion rights. And, you know, there just seems to be no end to their stubbornness. You know, the Catholic Church still thinks it's above the law when it comes to abuse victims. There's a small group of survivors of sexual abuse held a news conference outside the Baltimore Marriott waterfront where the bishops were meeting. And they wanted to call for bishops to list credible abusers and to stop lobbying against state legislation that would extend statutes of limitations for abuse lawsuits. So the Catholic Church, it just does not seem to care whatsoever what anybody thinks other than itself. Ben.
Yeah, I noticed that as well, and it's very interesting because that particular like denial of communion to Nancy Pelosi is like there, and I know that the Catholic Church does stratify their sins in different tiers, like Protestant Christianity, and I don't know about Mormonism, like with the last article, but some branches of Christianity will say, well, all of these sins are equal. So at least for those churches, it's a bit easier to pick on for this particular thing. So I know the Catholic Church prioritizes certain types of sin, but even so, if you're gonna make this power play, this PR stunt of saying, well, I don't approve of your support of abortion rights, so I'm going to deny you specifically communion, when they haven't done that for people that have committed other sins, like talking about the abuse within the church community itself. Why are they not denying communion to the abusers? Why are they not denying communion to people who get divorces or people who exhibit other types of sinful activity? Why does it seem to be that this is limited to whatever public issue is at the forefront? And this is where we see them as well saying, this is my stance on a political issue, and I'm making this I'm going to threaten a politician and say, you don't get communion, and then by extension, you don't get the afterlife. Like, you are committing to purgatory or whatever because you are stuck in this view, and I don't agree with it. So it's definitely manipulative, and it's very abusive, kind of in the same way that the Catholic Church is abusive in a lot of other areas as well.
Yeah, Kelley.
Yeah, I was going to agree that you're right there. They're not asking all the rest of the parishioners what their stance is on abortion before they give them communion, right? They're just picking these high-profile politicians because they're making a political statement. And this isn't the first time they've done it. It goes back to John Kerry, who was running for president against George Bush. They denied him communion too for the same reason. Right. So this is a tactic that these conservative bishops in the U.S. have been doing for quite some time. There are a lot of members. I don't want to condemn the whole Catholic Church for some of these guys. There are members of the church that have really gone far to the right. There was a priest here just south of me in Wisconsin that was removed from the church because he just went full MAGA, full crazy Trump MAGA, and they actually removed him. There was also another bishop who had gone a little too conservative, and the Pope called him to Rome and gave him a job in Rome instead. So he wasn't out in the public here in the U.S. spouting his crazy conservative stuff. So the church has taken it at least a few steps against some of the people who have gone a little too far, which I think is a good thing. But yeah, I don't think they've ever done enough. And one of the things that I was there was a couple of things that I was really on board with when they were discussing what to do to move to the future. Again, I'm getting tongue tied. I'm really having a hard time tonight. And those were civil discourse and protecting the environment. And I think most of us can get on board with those, right? And the Catholic Church actually does have a fairly short but supportive history of environmentalism. So I was happy to learn that because I didn't realize it. And hopefully they can change the minds of some of their more conservative members of their parishes while they're reaching out to some of because they are reaching out to the more liberal members of the church about the horror of abortion, right? So maybe they could use that same messaging to do some other things that are for the better. I do know that there was a Pew Research poll published in May 2022 that says 56% of all U.S. Catholics favor legal abortion. It's even mentioned in the article that the bishops were concerned the parishioners weren't reading the document they published with their views on these subjects. So that kind of points out to what Richard was saying too, that it's not, they're not getting through to the people who are sitting in the pews, because those people are changing their ideas socially, right? Richard, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one, isn't it? It's I think I don't know. I think when this is kind of, like I said earlier, the opposite of the Mormon article for me, and I think sometimes I think a lot of the time, as we said in that article, I think when social attitudes are changing, it won't hurt a religious organization to take on board those attitudes. And I think the one thing we've not touched upon in this, which is I think the most important aspect of it, is it's not just a case of social attitudes. It's not just a case of, as our religious friends would like to say, subjective morality and just changing your mind and doing what you feel like. This is a case of what the science says. And that's the Catholic Church, and I'm going to be nice to them. You know, I'm going to follow Kelley a little bit and be nice to them and defend them a little bit here. When it comes to science, usually they're quite good with it. You know, they don't oppose it. They were, you know, it was a Catholic priest who kind of was one of the first people to come up with the idea of Big Bang cosmology and put that forward. And they're not opposed to science, it seems, in general, until it comes to morality, what they consider morality. And I think that's where they need to change the stance, because I think that and I'm going to pass over to Ben so he can talk about the actual science rather than me just rambling on about general science headline kind of type things. But I think the science is quite clear on abortion, and you know the stance of that and what should be done and what is the actual right thing to do outside of some kind of religious belief. But Ben, do you want to talk about the actual science of abortion for a little bit and in this context?
That would take a super, super long conversation. But I mean, it all comes down to people who are not responsible for patients, or people who are not the patients themselves, should not be making medical decisions for anybody else. You cannot interfere with anybody else's medical care. And it is extremely problematic when you say, this is how I would handle an issue, when you have no idea what the core of the issue is. And once you blur the lines between you can't do this for a medical reason, it becomes more and more dangerous to manage a patient who might have an emergency. Let's say somebody who has an ectopic pregnancy or an inevitable abortion or a septic abortion, any of those possibilities. And you blur those lines enough, and now doctors cannot practice the evidence-based medicine, and they cannot do the best thing to preserve whatever the goal is for that patient. If the patient says, I would rather you save me than save the fetus, that is a reasonable goal to pursue. So I think once you start meddling in someone else's medical care, it's dangerous for everybody involved. And so even if you have religious convictions and thoughts about whether or not you personally would do it, it does not matter, because you should not be meddling in that responsibility if you yourself are not part of that equation.
Yeah, I'd kind of like your opinion on this, because this is something we touched upon in one of the earlier articles, and what you know does the Catholic Church have the right to say to their own members, abortion, we think abortion is a sin? So therefore,
Yeah.
we're going to stop you taking communion if you have that stance.
I think it's manipulative, and they probably shouldn't. But that's also my bias in thinking that their religion isn't true. But but if a religious organization wanted to come out and say, "Hey, we don't approve of you taking this action," and someone of that religion says, I don't want to take this action for myself, that again enters into bodily autonomy for them. And so the same way that I don't think you should make decisions for me, I shouldn't make decisions for you. And if you want to use that as a reason, whether or not it's a good reason, if you want to use that as a reason to make your own medical decision, then I will support you in the best way I can. And then I will hope that you are safe in the way that you do that, and that you have appropriate medical care while you take that. But yeah, the manipulation thing is, I don't think it's ethical, but that's another debate entirely.
Yeah, Kelley, so to stop this becoming the Richard and Ben show, we've been talking for quite a while. Do you want to jump in?
Going back to something that you mentioned earlier, that there was a counter protest by the Survivors Network of those abused by priests, which I think would be SNAP, which I thought was a weird abbreviation. But their Maryland director, David Lorenz, called on all the bishops to be more openly transparent. And the one archbishop that wasn't transparent at all was Brolio, the new president, which I found interesting, very, very interesting. And another thing that I found really weird about that was his diocese was the military. Is he trying to hide sexual abuse in the military? I don't know. I really don't know. But I would hope not. I would really, really hope not.
Yeah,
Go
on.
Go ahead. I was about to say something. I saw that you had mentioned something in your notes to round off the end of the meeting, but
I just wanted to bring it back. I don't want to, we'll come.
Yeah, I don't want to push you into anything.
I want to. I want to, as I said earlier, there was a thread throughout this article of the Bishops' Conference, but it touched on more than one subject. And, most of the subjects that we talked about have been quite heavy and quite serious subjects. But there was, and I'm not suggesting this isn't serious, but it just seemed out of place to me. And that's the fact that, we know Catholics wouldn't be Catholics without making somebody a saint. And this article tells us that the bishops have voted for 3 American women to be considered as saints. One who died of cancer and remained faithful, one who reported mystical experiences, and one who spread the word to African Americans. So I want to break this down a little bit. I didn't want to leave the article without talking about this. So we had one who didn't question God when he didn't intervene at her time of great suffering. So she was worthy of a prize. One who had delusions, or lied, or both. She was worthy of a prize. And one who used charity as a smokescreen to make more Catholics. Worthy of the prize? Check. And their rewards? What are these great prizes that they're going to get for this? Sainthood after the dead, when they can't even enjoy it. And I just found that, I found it firstly bizarre that it was tapped onto this article whatsoever, because it just didn't seem to kind of make any sense in context of the rest of the article. But I found it just a bit bizarre anyway, that this whole idea of sainthood, the lady who endured great suffering and not lost her faith, like that was some kind of great thing for the Catholic Church, so they could make her a saint for that. I just found that really bizarre. I just wanted your two's opinions on that little bit of the article.
But I mean, a lot of people die of cancer and remain Catholics. Are you going to sanctify all of them? Because there's more than just her.
Yeah. She must have been really faithful.
Really special.
Really, really faithful. Like happy to suffer. No, not just suffering, but happy to suffer. Thank you, God, for him giving me this suffering so that I can become even more faithful to you because of it. Kelley.
I was thinking there are innumerable Catholic saints. What's wrong with having another innumerable more? That's a hard thing to say. But I mean, I thought that was kind of weird too, that they did have all these heavy subjects, and then hey, let's just end the meeting on a lighthearted thing of making people saints, right?
Yeah, I'm sure it's not lighthearted to the Catholics. Okay, so overall, let's have a final thought on the article. We'll start with Kelley.
Final thought is good example of the Catholic Church still trying to enforce its medieval ideals on a progressive society, one that's leaving it behind. And I think they really need to get their shit together, and look at what's happening around them. They are bleeding people from the pews, and maybe it'll smarten them up.
Yeah, Ben?
Yeah, my thoughts are to everybody that's providing resistance against this, it's working. It might not be working super quickly. We might not be seeing a lot of progress at once, but the fact that they've had to have meetings to question their stance on this and think about, hey, we're being ruined by this younger generation of people. Good. They should have to think about that. And I don't want any of you going into a voting booth and thinking that you don't have influence, because you do. We are making some waves, and you are causing people to reconsider their ideology. So power to you, especially Gen Z. I love Gen Z. I said that already. Gen Z, you're going to do some fantastic things for this world. Don't you ever stop.
Yeah, they're great final thoughts. Thank you, guys. So, listen, you can become a member of this channel for as little as 99 cents a month. Nothing, is it really? Click the join button below the video. This will give you access to special chat emojis. And also, we have, this is my favorite bit of the announcements, I'm not going to lie, we have a brand new store. Visit tiny.cc/merchaca to get your favorite items like t-shirts, hoodies, and coffee mugs. You can check out our new items like beanies, phone cases, and I still don't know what a tote bag is, but you can get one regardless of my knowledge of them or not. All ACA shows feature a special limited edition item each month, which you can see on your screen. Isn't that fantastic? That's awesome. That's our lovely non-profit stood outside of, I believe that's a White House. I'm not American, so I might be wrong. All ACA shows feature a special limited edition item each month. You can get yours at the store. So be sure to check out our store for the non-profits merch and merch from all the other shows. We are going to go into our final segment, and taking us in is Kelley.
Okay, this is a look back, and we're going to talk about Thomas Jefferson and how he refused to acknowledge Thanksgiving. And you're probably thinking, wait a minute, there was no Thanksgiving when Jefferson was president, and you would be correct. It wasn't finalized as a national holiday until Abraham Lincoln. But both presidents that preceded Jefferson, Washington, and Adams, both declared national days of Thanksgiving. And Jefferson had the opportunity to do that as well, but refused. And this article kind of examines why. And mostly it comes down to the fact that while Jefferson might have been irreligious, he also believed in states' rights. And he thought it should be up to the state to declare a day of Thanksgiving. So I'm not sure if that's correct. If correct or not, Ben, what do you think? Was that correct? The correct way to look at it, or should we just throw Thanksgiving into the trash heap anyway?
I mean, when I read this, it was definitely what I gathered was that he refused to celebrate due to the lack of separation between church and state. And I think that really missed the point of the problem with Thanksgiving. Like, yeah, I mean, it is a problem that there isn't separation of church and state. But if you think about Thanksgiving and the fact that a bunch of colonists came over and genocided a people, that would be a better reason maybe to avoid it. Like, hey, I don't like this holiday because we killed people, is probably a better focus than, I don't support this holiday because of the separation between church and state, but I don't really care about, the people that we stole land from. So I don't know. It was a very weird article, and maybe I'm not looking at it right, but like it seems like some misplaced priorities to me a little bit. I don't know, Richard. What do you think?
I don't know. I've got to be honest. Before I read this article, I've learned more in this article about Jefferson in one sitting than I ever knew about him before. I've wrote this, so I'm going to say it now, although reading it back, it's horrendous. All I knew was that he had a private jet, a pet white rabbit, and was married to Grace Slick. That's all I knew about Jefferson before. There's a joke for the old timers. Kelley, you'll get it. But no, apparently there was much more to him than that. And he had a life and career that was rich with controversy. The examples given in the article, that he was obsessed with mastodons, which are prehistoric elephants, for those of you who didn't know. And he thought they still lived in America. And he had some very mixed messages about slavery. And of course, his resistance to endorsing Thanksgiving. And I'm with Ben on the confusion here, because the reasons given in the article for his not supporting Thanksgiving was because he didn't agree with it with regards to the separation of church and state. But yet later on in the same article, it tells us that when he was governor, he was absolutely fine with it. And it was fine for a governor to be fine with Thanksgiving. So it seemed to kind of completely belittle the reasons he'd given for being against it to start with. It was like his whole stance had changed with his political position. Kelley.
It's a little more nuanced than that. Because he was a real states' right advocate. He was in direct opposition to Alexander Hamilton, who was espousing the Federalist system, right? So when he says that we should build this wall between religion and the government, he was talking about the federal government, not the state government, right? And this is an idea that's still carried down with that recent overturning of Roe v. Wade. It was the same type of philosophy that the SCOTUS pursued in that ruling. Oh God, you're really just getting tongue-tied today. But that the states should be able to decide these things and not the federal government. So Jefferson, while you think he's like walking two different ways here, or having a foot on two sides of a fence, he's actually looking at both of them as two completely different things, right? But he was a complete advocate of keeping the federal government out of any religious practices or ideals, and that culminated in his famous letter to the Danbury Baptists, which is quoted in this article and has been used countless times as an example of what the founding fathers intended for the subject of that separation, right? He himself, while he displayed deist attitudes, and I thought it was interesting in this article that he was even accused of being an atheist because he wouldn't declare a national day of Thanksgiving. But he did display deist attitudes, and he even wrote, "In any age, the priest has been hostile to society." He was also quoted as saying in 1803, "I am Christian in the only sense in which Jesus wished anyone to be." So, and a bit ambiguous, most likely on purpose for his time period, but it doesn't seem to be much different than modern day politicians either, keeping one foot on either side of the fence. So in a lot of ways, though, his religious ideals mirrored some of what the Universalist Unitarians preach today, including the idea that the miracles of Jesus were just fictional. So I have a lot of mixed views on Jefferson, but I'm sure most people do. So Ben, what do you think? You want to add to it?
I mean, with this whole thing, like I see a lot of atheists, especially, but also most Americans get hung up on these founding fathers, and well, the founding fathers wanted this, or like they wanted this thing. Like they were literally just people with some good ideas and some really awful ideas. And this whole argument of, well, they were deist or they were theist or they were atheist, like I don't really care. And the fact that even if Jefferson, like, even if his goal was to separate church and state, we see problems with his other ideas and where his intentions lie with slavery and with colonization and ways to treat other human beings. So his views on Thanksgiving, uh, just, I don't know, maybe there's too much respect in general given to the founding fathers, and maybe we need to dial back and say, hold on, like, can we view these founding fathers as people with ideas and critique their ideas without putting them on some pedestal that maybe they don't deserve? I don't know, Richard, what do you think?
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback on you anyway from the aspect of, you know, the founding fathers having different ideas on different subjects and some of them not being altogether savory. I think from an outsider's perspective, looking in at America, what I see regarding the founding fathers is that, and I think this touches on that point perfectly about all the different ideas, is that they mean anything to whoever's looking, the political persuasion of those who are looking at them. Right wing people see them as kind of supporting their stance. Left wing people see them as supporting their stance. And I think it's just because, and I'm by no means an expert on this in any way whatsoever, but I think it's partly due to the fact that they have such wide-ranging views, and for a lot of the cases, for the time, they were quite liberal, and in other cases, they had the attitudes of the time. And you can, if you want to pick and choose from somebody like that, you can pick and choose from somebody like that, and I think that's a real problem. In regards to all of the founding fathers, is that you can kind of, if you don't do as I know we've talked about Andrew Seidel's fantastic work on this book before. He's done some great work looking at that kind of period and what the founding fathers actually wanted. And their opinions for kind of the separation in church and state. And I think that'd be a good place to look if you want more nuance into that side of it. I think in general, and this is a general article like a lot of the ones we've looked at are today, I think you can take what you want from what you want. For me, this article, Kelley went into some great detail in this article. For me, it was just, they were just trying to squeeze as much as they could out of a headline. I mean, the article even told us that he helped popularize macaroni and cheese in the US after sampling it in France. You know what I mean? And that for me, that's what I took away from the article. And that's maybe it says more about me than than the article itself. But the fact that they had to put that in there tells me that it wasn't an article of much substance to begin with. So come on, we'll go to Ben first for his final thoughts on this one.
I mean, I've already said really what I need to say. The founding fathers, they're just people, and some ideas were great, some were not. And maybe you agree with Thomas Jefferson on Thanksgiving. I don't really care. Think what you want about his Thanksgiving views, but that's all I got.
Kelley.
Well, I think I said all I need to about the actual subject, but I do want to touch on something else you mentioned. He really did think they were going to find mammoths. He actually instructed Lewis and Clark to keep an eye out for him when he sent them on the expedition. So that's actually
that was a rabbit hole I started going down when I was doing my research on this article, and I thought, I've got to stop. I cannot make this about that, although I would have liked to. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Okay, so we're coming up towards the end of the show now. I can't believe myself and Ben have got through a whole episode of a show together and not talked about British cuisine, but we've managed it. I think that's an achievement in itself. I was going to have fun on here with Kelley and Ben every day of the week. They're just two good friends. So, what's not to like about doing a show with two of your very good friends? If you want to see more of myself, Kelley, and Ben, a good way of doing that and talking about us is to join our fan social media outlets. You can find most of the non-profits hosts on the atheist community of Discord by going to tiny.cc/acddiscord and on Facebook at tiny.cc/fbnp. If you would like to support the show, you can, and we would like you to. It'd be really nice. You can do so by becoming a patron at tiny.cc/patreonmp. If you find yourself already shopping at Amazon, you can support the atheist community of Austin by shopping at smile.amazon.com and selecting Atheist Community of Austin as the beneficiary. Be sure to use that link to help out the ACA. We really do appreciate it, and it doesn't cost you anything. And, from friends who've been using that link, they say it's really, really good. It really, really does help the ACA. We do value your feedback. Tell us what you like and what you don't like in the comments, or email us at nonprofits@atheist-community.org. Also, visit the Atheist Community of Austin's official website at atheist-community.org on the latest of what's been happening. And feel free to contact the ACA at atheist-community.org. And if you don't know that address by now, the amount of time I've just said it, then, wow, your brain needs some work, my friend. This has been a good show. Just before we end, I'm going to get some very, very quick views on this, final thoughts on the show as a whole. I'll start with Kelley.
I had a great time. I always do when I work with you, Richard. And Benny, it was really awesome to do a show with you for the first time. I was so happy. I've been so nervous actually doing a show with you because I'm a big fan of yours. So I felt like I was rubbing shoulders with greatness there, so I don't appreciate it.
If I'm greatness, you gotta look somewhere else because it is misappropriated. But
it's all subjective, man.
I guess if I get some last words. So since Richard brought it up, I'm going to pose a question to everybody in the chat, everybody who's watching this. I don't care when you're watching this, but I want you to leave a comment below, and I want you to either say yay or nay for peas and gravy, and that's it. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, it is. Do you know this show seems to have had a thread running through it regarding the subjects, and I think it's an important thread. Although the articles themselves have been, I've not always agreed with them. I'm not going to lie, but I think they've had a thread running through them, and I think that's a thread we could possibly bring up in the future or look at in the future. And if you want to see that, please do contact us. And that's the kind of idea of religions changing. Is it a good thing that religions change through time and try and keep up with what's happening in the kind of wider world at the expense of some of the more, let's say, conservative viewpoints? I'll leave that one with you. In the meantime, thank you all for watching, and we will see you next time.
Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.